everyone. Welcome to Make for Tomorrow, this afternoon's event. Thank you for coming wherever you are, whether you're on a hospital ward, in an office, at your kitchen table, on the sofa, or maybe sitting out in the garden. I don't know about you, but here and across the south it's gorgeously sunny. So but yeah, thank you so much for coming. We are always so happy to have you here, and these moments where we can come together, I mean, they're just more important than ever. So yeah, it's going to be a good one this afternoon. So just quickly, in case it is your first time here, my name is Lucy. I work for Sussex Partnership Foundation Trust. I'm their Arts and Health lead, and our Arts and Health programme is called Make Your Mark. And you are in a very exciting project called Make for Tomorrow. If you've not come across it, do go to our, have a little explore on the rest of the website, because there's been an amazing programme of events starting last September. And there's two strands. There's the In Conversations, which this is one of them, which has been curated by the amazing and brilliant Arts Over Borders, an excellent partner on this project. And we're so thankful to them for all their amazingness that they've brought to this. And then there's also, if you go through all the past videos, we've had some really exciting visual arts workshops as well. So we've also been working with hospital rooms who brought in some incredible visual artists, and they've done some excellent workshops and projects that you can pick up and use as and whenever you want, on your own, with groups, whatever. So yeah, do check out what we've been up to. But this afternoon, we are so excited. We've got three rather wonderful people. Now, unlike some of the people in our In Conversations who we've often seen on our screens or their names on the front of books, these three folk are behind the scenes. So they are the ones that kind of make stuff happen. So let me just, so the person who's going to be, I'm sorry, I'm just opening my phone because I've got a really brilliant little blurb about Kat, Kat Gill, who is going to be steering the conversation this afternoon. And Kat, she's a brilliant person that does all sorts of interesting things. I know this will spark some people's interest. So let me read this out so I don't miss anything. So Kat, she's a theatre and facilitator maker. She specialises in developing and delivering arts projects with a focus on inclusive and accessible practice. We love that. She currently works across a wide variety of participatory projects, including, and sorry, Kat, if I pronounce this wrong, Guyama Arts at St Margaret's House, an extraordinary organisation, a combined arts project for disabled adults from the Bangladeshi community in East London. Also Speech Bubbles, a drama project for primary students with communication needs, and Lewisham Youth Theatre, an open access youth theatre project in South East London. So Kat herself is living an extraordinary life, doing some brilliant things with all sorts of people, but she'll be steering the conversation, and she is joined by the brilliant Ben Qasim Monks, who is a producer and exec at Improbable Theatre. Kat can tell you a little bit more about him in a minute. And then the wonderful Suzanne Alleyne, who is, now I'm going to let her introduce herself, because she does all sorts of interesting and brilliant and important things to do with art strategy and kind of conversations and teaching and learning, and just generally brilliant creative thinker. So the subject for this afternoon, and we would love for you to join in, is all about why art matters in terms of our mental health. You know, we're in a very strange time. We're looking at potentially the end of this peculiar period where we've all been separated from each other, and really want to know from you and hear from them about what is art's role within that and why it matters. So please, underneath the screen, you'll see there's a little box which says Ask Ben and Suzanne a question. Click that, it will take you through to another tab, type in your question and press submit, and it will come through to us here, and Kat can pick up your questions and feed them through to Ben and Suzanne. So do please get involved. We would love to hear from you. This is such an important subject to talk about, and really at the heart of what the whole of Make for Tomorrow has been. So I'm going to shush now. I think I've gone on for too long already. And I'm going to hand you over to Kat. And yeah, enjoy, everyone. Thanks, Kat. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Suzanne.
Thank you so much, Lucy, for that introduction. I felt excited by what I do, which I usually do feel excited, but it's nice to have someone say it back to you in that way with so much enthusiasm. And so I'm really pleased to have Suzanne and Ben in this conversation with me this afternoon, and also really looking forward to hearing your questions as well. So please do get involved as the conversation goes on. So Ben and Suzanne are both, as Lucy said, leaders and people that make things happen in the arts. I'm going to just talk a little bit about them both by way of introduction, and then hand over so you can hear it from them themselves. So Suzanne is a cultural thinker. That's a title that she coined to describe her work as a strategist, researcher, and conversational artist. She's the head of an eponymous cultural consultancy, which combines commissioned partnerships with as a cultural incubator. She is an inaugural Arts Council England Changemaker, a fellow of the RSA and a Churchill Fellow, and the inaugural co-chair of What's Next. She holds an MA in Arts and Cultural Management from King's Cross, London, where she is currently a visiting research associate and guest lecturer. And previous to all of that, if you can even imagine that there is a previous, Suzanne spent 25 years working across the commercial sector, supporting and consulting for high-profile international organisations and individuals such as Barclaycard, Channel 4, Swatch, Swisski, and that's just naming a few. And her current work focuses on leadership, power, difference, and society. And Suzanne, I'm really looking forward to hearing your insights, because all of those things seem so relevant to our conversation this afternoon. But I'm going to come back to you in a moment to hear a bit more about that, if that's okay. And just let everybody know a little bit more about Ben. So Ben is an arts producer from London who now lives in Exeter in Devon. His work as a producer spans a whole range of art forms like comedy, producing the sketch Gap Year, I hope I've said that right, Ben, about Orlando, a travelling student that went viral, and visual arts like working with the Colsler Trust on an arts mentoring for prisoners and secure hospital patients, theatre, working with writers like Philip Ridley, Timberlake Wertenbaker, Mike Bartlett on plays in the UK and also in the US. Film like Bird's Eye View, the UK's Festival of Female Filmmakers, and music as a trustee of the multi-story orchestra, which presents classical music concerts in car parks and other unexpected locations. He's currently the executive director of Improbable, which is a theatre company that uses improvisation to make shows, operas, and workshops. So Ben, I'm really looking forward to your insights as your work spans so many different art forms. When we talk about the arts, I feel like you really have a sense of so many different aspects of that. Could you just tell us a little bit more about how you got to this point in your work in the arts?
Thanks, Kat. Hi, Suzanne. Hi, everyone. And thanks, Lucy, too. Yeah, that introduction makes it sound like I don't really know what I like, doesn't it? All those different things, which I guess is true, or at least it makes it sound maybe like I didn't really have a career plan, and that's definitely true. I think your question was, how did I get to where I am? And the answer is by not being qualified to do anything, and therefore trying lots of different things and seeing what worked. I started producing stuff when I was at uni. I was studying French. And the French Society wanted to put on a play. I think it was The Marriage of Figaro. And I knew I didn't want to be in it or direct it or design the sets or anything like that, but I knew I wanted to be involved in it. So I found myself kind of falling into this little administration role, I guess, getting the props and the costumes to the theatre on time, making sure we had the right team involved. Thinking about who was going to come to see it, that sort of thing. And I found out in the course of doing that job was called producing, and that it was a sort of holding of a space job, a kind of looking after a team, making a show job, and I kind of liked it. So I when I left university, I sort of kept doing little bits of producing in different projects as an evening and weekend thing alongside day jobs, and slowly over the course of maybe 10-12 years, that little bit of producing expanded from the evenings and weekends to actually start paying a day a week or 2 days a week or whatever, until I discovered it was a career. So yeah, trial and error, I think, is the answer to your question.
Thanks, Ben. That's really interesting. And I can definitely relate to just kind of not having a plan and trying out lots of stuff. That's definitely quite similar for me myself. Suzanne, it sounds like for you there was maybe like a bit of a transition where the arts became more of a focus for you. I may have got that wrong, so if I have, please correct me. But yeah, could you just tell us a little bit about your journey to where that's brought you to this point in your work?
Yeah, so I will share something with the audience. We have a WhatsApp group going, just in case I drop out, I've got no internet, that kind of thing. And when I heard the introduction and when I saw who's spoken before us, I was like, I feel like I'm a film director. I feel like I might direct Bond films, but that is absolutely not what I do. But I've never been introduced so well and so excitingly. I would say that I wouldn't even call it as a career. I didn't even know probably until maybe my late 30s, early 40s. I probably couldn't have defined what a career was. And in terms of sort of how did I get here, if you see me looking left, it's because I have to write things down. So the first thing I'll share is that I'm a service user. I have been a service user for a while. I have PTSD, dyslexia, dissociative disorder. I only really discovered those in the last decade, and I'm 55. And that's definitely impacted how I've navigated through life. So I started off, I left school quite early with no qualifications. Back in those good old days, you could just get a job and try something and then try something else. And so I ended up in publishing and learned a lot about brand. And then I got headhunted, so I went and worked for a design company. And the design company went bust, and I ended up in the mountains, and I got into snowboarding and skiing and surfing and all sorts of things that I absolutely really had no business doing. And it was all about, will you get on a plane? Yes. Do you know where you're going? Nope. Do I care? Nope. And from that, I started to work with some really big brands. And if I look back, it was, they saw things in me that I didn't see in myself. And I'm really, really grateful to them for that. And I suppose if you look back now, I suppose I was like a kind of a global freelance consultant who filled gaps. I used to call myself glue for a lot of time because I just felt like I brought things together. And then I got quite sick for a while, managed to still work, and I moved across to the arts because I met a poet in a party. And I swear to God, he probably thought I was chatting him up, but I was more like, you're black and you're a poet? I thought all poets were white and dead. And he was like, you know, obviously that's a question he'd been asked lots of times. And so I just invited him to come into my office, and we started talking about how could a poet make money? How could you be a spoken word poet and make money? How could you think about yourself as a brand? And a lot of that time, him and his friends were looking at me like, we just want to write and we want to get paid. And so you would think that I was helping them, but actually it turned out to be like a decade-long free introduction to kind of publicly funded art. So arts that our tax pays. And that's sort of how I made that move, how that transition. And oddly, I'm sort of going 180 now. So I sort of do a lot of my work is around thinking what we know in the arts that we can share outside and what we can share outside inside. And for me personally, that idea of art and mental health are really inextricably linked. I think I'll leave it there, otherwise I'll just talk the whole time and
well,
it'd be boring, wouldn't it?
Well, it certainly wouldn't be boring, actually. I would be well up for that. But also, it really does. It's almost as if we planned this, which we haven't. It actually really segues onto what was going to be my first question, which is when we kind of think about mental well-being, the arts are often held up as something that can benefit people's lives. And I guess I'd be really interested to hear from both of you. Like, what is it about art in your experience that means it can make a difference in that way, can benefit people, can support mental well-being? I know that's a super broad question, so yeah, feel free to I guess don't feel you have to answer it in its entirety, but it'd be really great to just hear your thoughts.
Who wants to go first, Suzanne?
So in case you haven't realised, me and Ben know each other, and we're a bit like Bim and Bam. We kind of just look at each other and outstare each other. And the truth of the matter is, I quite like Ben going first because it gives me time to think. But, you know, I won't hold that against you, and I will kick that off. So
Suzanne.
we did have a little free chat with the lovely Kat, and one of the things that came up, for me anyway, is I've made a move over the last 5 years. So I was always a consultant and a facilitator. And there was a certain safety in that. And so I was facilitating artists, I was supporting them. And one of the things they would sort of say is, oh my gosh, you know, I'm writing this book, or I'm going on stage for the first time with this show, and they would be really nervous, and I'd be like, I didn't really understand it. And more recently, I've become a researcher, and it's definitely moved more towards an artistic practice. So one of the things I think about how art supports mental health and how it interacts is really about bringing something very real, very visceral in art, with the human emotion and the human body. And so for me, what art does, the reason why I'm so invested in publicly funded arts, the arts that you and I pay for, we own it. Do you know what I mean? Not the big institutions. I'm really invested in that because for me it's a way that I can self-reflect. You know, quite often when I'm going through some sort of crisis or I'm thinking, sometimes it's too hard to situate myself in it. But actually, art allows me to look at things and interrogate things. But so that's the bigger idea. But on a smaller level, for me, it's about the fact that when I'm having to think about myself and my mental health and my mental well-being, I quite often have to sit in a place of discomfort first. And definitely as an artist, I feel that. I feel so nervous when I'm putting my research out or if I'm doing a talk. And so I think there's this kind of intertwining of the emotion and the overarching ideas. But I'm going to leave Ben to clean that up and be more articulate.
Oh, I don't think I can be more articulate, but I think that point about self-reflection is that feels really true to me. It makes me think about vulnerability. It makes me think about how so many elements of the world are constructed in a way or presented in a way where you're meant to know the right answer. You think about, I think that's true at all sorts of different levels. You can think about it at a kind of grand leadership level. A prime minister in charge of a country during a pandemic is meant to know the answer to solving it, right through to, anyone stepping into a job interview or any kind of formal social situation. It's become kind of socially difficult or politically difficult to say, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know how to handle this. I don't know the answer to your question, but maybe we can figure out that process of not knowing together. And that requires and sort of saying you don't know, I guess, requires a certain amount of vulnerability. And that's what I was thinking about when you were talking about self-reflection, Suzanne. But what one of the contributions the arts makes to wellness and well-being for me is around providing a space where it's okay to be vulnerable and it's okay to work on that process of vulnerability. Kat I think you were talking in the introduction about Improbable, the company I work with at the moment. Improbable is an improvisation company. So one version of what that means is that everything is created from the very beginning, from scratch. In a moment, you enter a space and you might receive an offer, you might hear a sound, you might listen to a word. Essentially, you're entering that space with a process of not knowing, of complete openness to whatever the world might present in that moment. In the same way as a stand-up comic might step onto a stage and respond to whatever is in the room or in the audience. And I think the arts kind of supports that sense of reflectiveness in the moment and of stepping into that position of vulnerability. And just one brief thought on that, with relation to this conversation. It does. So Suzanne, you were talking about being a service user. I've been a service user of NHS mental health services before, and that also makes me think about vulnerability. That makes me think about counselling and therapy sessions that I've been in, where, it's incredible. I found it incredibly hard to be present and be vulnerable in that moment, in that sort of setting where you've got X number of sessions with someone you're meeting for the first time at the beginning of them, and you're asked to kind of have this big conversation, no matter how well that space is held or how brilliant that person is at their job, and all the people I've ever met in those jobs have been brilliant, there is still a certain kind of edge that you've got to get over. And everything I think I've learned from improv, from arts, from working on that sense of vulnerability has helped get over those kind of edges in those situations.
Yeah, thank you both for those answers. I think I think there's something in the kind of creative process, as you're saying, Ben, that can, it can be kind of scary or can make you kind of feel a bit vulnerable. I guess a bit like you were saying, Suzanne, about the artists that you've worked with, and they've, that kind of nervousness or something's about to come out, or the self-doubt that can come in, all of that stuff. And I think that can be true for an artist who it's their whole career and they've done it for a long time, or even for somebody who's decided to go to a drawing workshop for the first time. At any level it can be. So I guess I'm interested in what you were saying, Suzanne, about allowing us to kind of self-reflect. And I guess I might have a question around, like, so what are the conditions that are needed to allow that kind of self-reflection, that expression, but kind of safely, without asking people to be making themselves too vulnerable in a way? Or what are the conditions around the work? And I guess that might mean in quite a small sense, in like a given performance or workshop or something, but also maybe in a bit of a larger sense, like what needs to be around the arts that people can kind of go through that process of that can be quite a vulnerable process, that creative process, but do so in a way that's kind of well supported or safe. Is that question?
So I think Ben's probably going to be able to pick this up, because I think what's even probable is that they create spaces, and it's a very fast used word, of safety. But for me, I noticed that someone asked in the questions, why are art and mental health linked? And in that sense, I think there's part of an answer here. I think for people who go to a theatre or watch a film, and actually I'm going to include football here, for football players who see what they're doing as an art, the art of that craft of playing football, behind that is it can be quite stressful, and how that space is created for that is really particular. Now, different theatres, different disciplines, we all do that differently. But actually, if I bring that analogy across to mental health, it's about creating an environment in whatever way that might be. Now, I worked briefly with a brilliant artist, and before she went on stage, she would sit on the stage cross-legged in a dark room for 10 minutes. Now, if you took that away from her, she would not have been able to perform, right? Now, for me, I have dyslexia and PTSD, so one of the things I asked Kat was, sometimes, can I go second, because I need that time to think, otherwise my brain just shuts down. So those are some very practical ways for me. But ultimately, someone else asked a question about, it sounds like I'm really interested in difference, and I am. But ultimately for me, it's all about, how do we as a society understand that we're all different? And in the art space, how do we create those spaces? First of all, that everyone gets to do art. That's a whole bugbear. But if you are doing it and you are being paid, the fact that there is a transaction of money to pay you is not what makes you able to do well. In the same way, the fact that you may be, a multi-million-pound footballer, that does not mean that you score goals. So I'm a bit of a Liverpool supporter. Look at that right now. All the money in the world, they're languishing outside the top six. And so if you think about that in art context and a mental health context, what is it that we need to be well and thrive and create? So that might be a bit of a waffly answer. Sorry, Kat.
No, not at all. Ben, did you want to pick up on that at all?
I think I think that's really rich. I think the so when you were talking about the artist Suzanne who's sitting cross-legged on the stage, that makes me think about I guess about the difference between the product and the process. I guess this feels like a little bit of a sort of a cliche in theatre-y world, perhaps, but something about the fact that the way as a show is made, the atmosphere that's been present in a rehearsal room, for example, or just the atmosphere that might have been present on a film set or whatever, is somehow present in the play that people go to see or the film that ends up on screen. And I feel like that's really true. You can sort of tell the quality of interaction between each other between people in the work itself. But it also makes me think about, why do we, like, thinking about your question, Kat, of art and mental health, why do we even consume that art in the first place? You know, there's obviously something about storytelling, but there's also something about you know, art as a way of gathering information, that you might watch a film that's about a story you've never heard of, or see a play about a subject matter that you know nothing about, or listen to a podcast about someone you're curious in finding in exploring more, whose life you're curious about exploring, or something like that. But insofar as that relates to kind of live performance, it's an odd thing, isn't it? It's an odd thing to decide in an evening to go to the theatre. It's quite a hassle to go, decide to leave your house, pay some money, go into a building, take a punt on a show that you might not have heard of before, or a story that you don't know, and sit through that live experience and know that you can't really leave because you're in a dark room in the middle of an aisle, surrounded by loads of people. That's quite a kind of high stress way to consume a story, compared to watching a version of it on a film screen, or listening to it, or even reading it in a book in your own comfort. So why do we do that? Why do we choose to consume stories in that way through a live experience? And I guess that's about the kind of the sense of collectivity, that perhaps we choose to do that because the act of doing that, the process of doing that, is one of a sort of shared collective experience, that you're not there as yourself, you're there with all the other people who are laughing and smiling and crying with you. And I think that's really perhaps been emphasized during pandemic. Suzanne and I were talking about this the other day, that you were talking about football, Suzanne, and I think you're right. But it's interesting that even when football is now on the telly during the pandemic, the one sort of editorial decision that's been made is to pump in the crowd noise. Completely false, but it's there, it's present. And I think that's about this sort of sense of collective experience. I'm waffling my answer back at you, sorry, but
No.
I think it's about that. I think art and mental health is about a reminder that this is a sort of shared human experience, and a really kind of live version of that experience.
Definitely. And I think we might come back to this idea about collective experience, and how, particularly collective in person kind of live experience, about how that hasn't been possible, for the last year really, and what the impact that might have, and how the arts might be part of that, coming out of that. But before that, I just wanted to come to a question that's come in from the audience, which is, it's kind of a statement and a question. So it's, art is not bread, not money, nor security. How can it really mean something on a daily basis to those who struggle? And is it really only for those after the struggle, the more privileged of us? Please, Suzanne.
So it's so funny that you've picked that up, because I was frantically thinking, can I listen and type Kat a question that says, how are we answering questions? Because I really want to talk about that particular one. So on a really practical level, if you're talking about, let's look really wide funnel. If you're talking about the funded arts, they are paid for with public money. And there is always this tension, should we pay for art? Should we be paying for more mental health? Should we be paying for road services? So to that extent, there is a wider question about what society should be paying for. What I would say, though, not for all, but for some, for me, art and culture is an ongoing battle between high culture and low culture, right? For me, cinema is art. For me, EastEnders is art and culture. And actually, if you wiped out everything that was influenced by art, I would ask what you have left. Like, really, there's a lot that are influences, whether it's commercials, whether it's films, a lot of people who start in theatre. I feel passionately that it isn't just for those at the point at which you're no longer struggling. For me, there are times when I can't engage with my friends. I just don't have the words. But I can engage with Netflix, or I can engage with podcasts. And in terms of taking part, I know that as a service user, there were many times where art was used both as a method of actually engaging me, but also as an actual technique. So I, for me personally, and I really feel I should kind of preempt that, I think it depends on what you're calling art, and I definitely think it depends on what art you're watching. And, you know, one of the arguments that I have been having very loudly is in this lockdown, for some, not all, of the public funded arts institutions, if we had engaged better with wider communities, then this kind of question wouldn't come up. So I think it's a really valid question. I will get off my soapbox. I really appreciate that question coming in. Ben, do you have anything to add to that?
Not very much. I agree with you that the this sense of high culture, low culture is a really unhelpful binary that doesn't really exist. The person who asked the question, you're right. Art isn't bread, but I guess it is kind of soul food. And I agree with Suzanne that when it's not present, when stories aren't present, or spaces to think aren't present, that's when we miss it, I think.
And yeah, and there's another question just come in, which kind of links to something I was interested in asking you both, is that you know, will the arts kind of have the resources to offer things, and particularly Suzanne, you know, this idea of publicly funded arts, you know, we don't quite know what's going to be I mean, I would argue personally that the public funded arts was kind of underfunded before the pandemic, you know, and we don't know what the picture's going to look like down the line. So a question coming in from the audience is, you know, theatres, cinemas, art galleries, they've all been shut for ages, they've lost loads of money, loads of people have lost jobs. Do you think that post-COVID these places will be for those who have not been hardest hit, and not those who already felt that those places weren't for them? So that's the audience question. But I suppose, you know, I've certainly, in terms of my work and my engagement with kind of venues and things like that, you do feel that kind of risk averseness of not wanting to take on work that's possibly less commercially viable, or you know, maybe seen as having kind of less of a ready audience, or say an audience, for example, like people with learning disabilities, that they aren't accessing the theatre as much as their non-disabled counterparts in society, and you know, the programming work that might appeal or be relevant or be made by other learning disabled artists isn't necessarily happening because of, well, it is happening, actually, I mustn't say that, it is happening in some places, but I would love to see it be happening more, because you know, and that goes for kind of all sorts of work, all sorts of groups. So yeah, it's something that I kind of feel really strongly about. Those places, those arts cultural institutions that have been really hard hit, is there a danger that there'll be kind of a slipping back in terms of taking, I don't even really like the word risk. I don't think it is a risk to make programming kind of diverse and open to the community. But I think, unfortunately, some people that are making those top decisions do feel that those kinds of things is risky
Sure.
commercially. So yeah, what's your thoughts about that? Are we going to be sliding backwards, or?
I have two. I guess I have two quick thoughts in response to that. Suzanne, you might want to add to these. Obviously, one thing is Kat, when you were talking, you said you used a phrase that was something like people who thinking buildings aren't for them. I just wanted to sort of reflect for a moment on that phrase, because I think it's really true. And I think creating that sense of exclusion from buildings, particularly from buildings that are paid for by all of us, by public money, is something that the arts collectively has got really, really wrong in the last, couple of decades. And it doesn't really make any sense. If you go back to, we're talking about storytelling, we're talking about theatre at one level. If you go back to, the idea of Greek or Roman theatre, that's a thing that happens on a street in a public place, sort of big forum theatre or big outdoor stuff that anyone walks past. And slowly over the course of however many hundred years it's been since Greeks and Romans. I told you I studied French, not history. It's like the arts industry has just found ways to put more barriers, more walls around that essential story, from taking it off the streets and putting it in a building, and then putting a ticket price around it, and then making the building smaller and the ticket price is higher, and so on and so on and so on. And I think we need to be really honest as an industry about how that has completely created the sense of exclusion that you're talking about. But in response to your second question, there is absolutely I think you're right. I think there's absolutely a risk that having got to that point, people, producers, people who make decisions about what stories need to be told, don't take very risky decisions right now because they want stories that sell loads of tickets, whatever. All that said, I'm still kind of hopeful, because what I've heard in the last year or so of loads of Zooms about, conversations about theatre, about the arts, about how stories are told, is attempts to kind of grapple with that thing of all the walls that we've put around the stories that we are telling and offering. And Suzanne was talking earlier about, Suzanne, you might want to pick this up, about sort of moving from a producer to a facilitator or artist. The idea of the artist not being a kind of star who rocks up in town and sings a glitzy ballad, but someone who's already in town and just kind of convenes or facilitates a conversation that's already present and tells the stories that are already there. And I think that I notice more and more work like that happening. And if that's right, I hope it's right, then that feels like a direct answer to the thing of creating buildings that people, rightly, me too, feel excluded from, because it's stories that are already there and already present in the people and communities and lives that we're all living. I don't know if you agree with that, Suzanne.
So I think I do agree with that. I think in answer specifically to that question, do I think lots of jobs will be lost, and will those who are already hardest hit be hit? The honest answer is yes, I do. And part of what I choose to do is to try and volunteer in organisations and movements where we're doing our very best to address that. I think that this pandemic and the virus has really held a mirror up to who we are as society. And I think that coming out of that, there is for me, my own political beliefs are that there is a really big push to try and get back to what was. I'm really interested in power. I'm interested in how that underpins inequalities. And so I think that where I am optimistic is that I am seeing more space for more people who are different. But we know that stats can be made to look any which way someone wants, but certainly the stats are really scary around access into the arts as a career for young people at the moment. But stats are equally scary. For me, I do quite a lot of work around the black and brown community and mental health. I do a lot around women of a certain age, because I am a woman of a certain age. Those are things that I'm partly passionate about. And on the one hand, I can tell you those stats aren't good, but on the other hand, I can say unless the arts generally reflect society, then we're not going to have that change made. But I do think there are some organisations, this is a national conversation, but there are some really amazing organisations, and maybe Ben and I will tweet about them, but some that come to mind that are doing insanely incredible work, obviously apart from Improbable, who are amazing. But people like Tourette's Hero, which is run by the amazing Jess Tom, if anyone doesn't know her, Heart and Soul, some other places that I know, Battersea Arts Centre, the old Oval House that is now Brixton House, Eclipse up in the north. You know, there are those organisations, and we are collectively trying to, I think for us, art is about reflecting society. I think that's probably the best way that I can try and explain that. Oh, and I'll give you one example of why art is so important. When Grenfell happened, Jon Snow, the newscaster, said that, and I sort of paraphrase but quote, that in a part the media were responsible. And the reason he said that was that he said that they didn't report the stories that were there in Grenfell, and had they reported them, they may have got a higher profile before Grenfell happened. And I use the same analogy with the arts. Whose stories are getting told? Because if everyone's stories are getting told, then in the pandemic they become not just a source of comfort, but they also become a source of documentation and witness. And that feels really important to me. So yes, I do think that more people are going to be excluded, but I think definitely the three of us are fighting tooth and nail to do our little bit. Kat, back to you.
Yeah, well, I think so. We've had another person from the audience who says, it sounds as though all of you are involved / interested in people and groups who are often excluded or underrepresented in the arts. And why is that important to you? And post-COVID, where the arts are under lots of pressure, how do you see this work being a priority? So I suppose that is a little bit about what we've just been talking about. But yeah, would either of you have anything else to add in terms of why that feels important, or how do, you know, like you say, I guess we are all trying to do our bit to maintain and to grow that work, and I guess what how do we keep it on the table? How do we keep it a priority and keep pushing that forward, and why is that important?
So I'm going to jump in. One of the things I'm interested in big things, and that quite often goes against me. So if someone comes to me with a project, I'll quite often scale it up. But I'm also interested in the questions that aren't asked and the reasons behind them. So for me, I'm doing this work, this piece of research. I'm not doing it on my own. I'm working with neuroscientists and scientists and artists. But what I'm asking is, where does power reside in the brain and the body? And the reason I'm asking that is I wonder whether this desire for power underpins a lot of society's, what I see as fragilities. And so this idea of, and for me that impacts around the arts, because if you are, for example, seeking a traditional form of power, and your idea is to run a massive institution, and if power is all about how many people you have power over, this to me is the complete antithesis of this idea of could you make programming more inclusive if society is built on that power structure. So I think that would be my kind of weird roundabout answer about programming becoming more inclusive. Art doesn't sit in a silo, it sits, especially funded arts, it sits in that space of public and public interest. Do you know what I mean? This isn't a private gallery where someone can choose. This belongs to everyone. And so my question has been, actually in wider society, why don't the things that belong to everyone reflect everyone? And my answer is power. But Ben.
I love listening to you speak. I know nothing about neuroscience, but when you talk about power, what I guess it also makes me think about that question of whose stories get told in the first place. One of the reasons I really like improvisation, which is the thing Improbable does, is because when you
Ben, do you want to just in case there's anybody out there who doesn't quite know what you mean by improvisation, just explain that a little bit.
Can I go before he does that, right? Because you were just saying, I was just like, oh, I'm not the chair. But then, like, one, what is improvisation? Like, I've seen it. But two, how does Improbable do improvisation? Right? How does that work? Do I just rock up and be like...
So good point. So what do I mean by improvisation? I guess improvisation has a little bit of an image problem, doesn't it? Because like mostly improvisation tends to mean kind of slightly drunk white men on a stage in a room above a pub doing something that isn't stand-up, which is a version of improvisation, sure. But there's also a school of improvisation that started in Chicago with a woman called Viola Spolin, who was a social worker who was working in Chicago and in a very kind of literal sense found that the most effective way in which she had conversations or dialogue with the young people in her care was through playing games with them. And she documented that process and she wrote the games, and they're what you might now think of, what are now called theatre games. She noticed that there was that in playing those games there was a kind of performance element to them, that young people in her care would step into different roles and felt more able in the moment to have conversations about different things if they were in the context of a game. She wasn't a theatre person. She was approaching that from a social work point of view. But what she noticed was that because they had a kind of performance quality in a way, they might become things that are useful for storytelling. So she comes at improvisation from a completely different perspective in the United States. In England, there's a guy called Keith Johnston, who was I guess the kind of godfather of British improvisation, and his story is about working at the Royal Court, which is a theatre in London that is known for its playwriting, its scripted playwriting. It commissions some of the sort of greatest living playwrights. Keith Johnston was working in the literary department at the Royal Court, but not particularly interested in scripted plays. And at the time he was working there were still censorship laws in the United Kingdom. So it was still technically illegal to gather as a troupe of performers on a stage in front of a live audience and say something, perform something that hadn't been written in a script and pre-approved by the censor's office. So technically, improvisation was illegal. And Keith Johnston was interested in finding ways of getting round that fact, which he just considered to be ridiculous, I guess. So he came up with this idea of what he called lecture demonstrations. He would say to the censor's office, this isn't an improvised show, it's a lecture demonstration. And the lecture that we're going to demonstrate to you is this group of performers responding to this drama school exercise or this drama exercise that I've written. And what you will witness as an audience is them playing out that exercise. And he played with that, and through those exercises invented effectively a series of games. And they grew into like there's a version of them that he calls theatre sport. So there's an element of competition in it, a kind of I guess a kind of slam style impro that's closer to, I guess, the sort of whose line is it anyway style impro as game or challenge stuff, but also because of the context in which he's making this on the stage of this big Royal Court Theatre. He's talking about playing games, about performance exercises, about finding ways of acting and storytelling that are just made up rather than relying on scripted stuff. A brief little story about that. There's a show Improbable made a couple of years ago called Lost Without Words that was made with a handful of actors in their 70s, 80s and 90s. And they are people who have made 50, 60, 70-year long careers performing scripted text. And that had been their living. But because they started at the point where censorship laws still existed, they began their training at a point where improvisation, that unscripted act of performance or storytelling, was illegal. And the reason Improbable got them together as a troupe was because those were people who, despite having those long and amazing careers of being stage actors, had never improvised before because they couldn't, or they weren't allowed to for a large part of that. I can't remember why you asked me that. It was something to do with explaining improvisation. I hope that helps. And I guess, oh yes, and what I was going to say is one of the things I really like about that, about literally turning up and not having a script or a provocation or an offer, but just being present in the room, is that sooner or later what emerges amongst that group of people is the truth. And all the power imbalances that I think I heard you speak about, Suzanne, all the things that are true in society end up being reflected in that room in some shape or form, because what's present in the room is people and they carry all the societal baggage with them. Go on, Kat.
Thank you, Ben. There's just a question that's come in that I want to ask you, because I know Improbable also do opera. I am right with that, yeah? So this question that's come in is that opera is the art form most in bed with power, and it takes most of the funds available, yet it is the most stagnant. Should it close down and give way to the majority and allow new forms more relevant to more people?
Great question. Yes, I completely agree with the premise of the question. It is the most in bed with power and it receives the most money. I would say there are, in case the person asking that question is is working in opera or is interested in getting involved in these conversations in more detail, there are some amazing organizations who are challenging that in a really real way. There's a festival called Tete a Tete, which happens in person and also online, which is opera made in all sorts of different ways. There's a organization called Opera UK that grew out of the pandemic. It's like 2 or 3 months old, that is having a conversations within people who make opera about exactly that power structure that you're talking about. What I would say though is I think that's it's true, of course, that opera occupies all that money. It's also a real image problem, because not all opera does that. And like the act of, or the kind of experience of live opera performance, I think is amazing. Improbable made a show a couple of years ago called Bambino, which is an opera for babies between 6 and 18 months. It doesn't take place in an opera house. It takes place in a circle of 20 to 30 adults and however many babies those adults bring with them. It's a sort of 30-40 minute narrative about a bird who discovers an egg and discovers the egg hatching. And we did it in theatres sometimes, but mostly we did it in gyms and church halls and places where it was kind of next to and the same price as another parent and baby activity. And one of the things I think that kind of taught me was that it's not opera, it's not a kind of problem with opera as an art form that means it's in bed with power, because the experience in those church halls, gyms, whatever, was beautiful and I think reciprocated. which wasn't about the art form. It's about the way it was presented. It's about the fact that that involved taking it into a place that isn't a massive building receiving millions and millions of pounds a year.
Thank
I don't know
you,
if that
Ben.
answers the question.
Thank you. Well, it certainly does for me. I mean, yeah, an opera for babies and toddlers sounds very far removed from, I think, what that audience member was rightly talking about in terms of it being a drain on resources. There's a few more questions coming in. I think we're not going to have time for all of, but if we could get this last one in. Someone's been asking, what have we been doing in lockdown while buildings have been closed and group gatherings banned, and also what arts, books, films have helped get us through that period. So I think we've got a few more minutes. So yeah, in brief, what have you guys been doing in lockdown, and what's been getting you through art wise? Oh, it's come to Suzanne. You're just muted, Suzanne, for the moment. But yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
I'll mute myself.
Thank you.
So I'll be really quick. So I was away doing research last February and came back and started lockdown a month early. So I feel like I've done my 1 year lockdown anniversary. And I've been doing loads of things, actually. Some of my artist friends have really taken voluntary or involuntary time to rest. I've probably been busier than ever. Doing this research has sort of totally kicked off. So doing some strategy. I think it's been really weird because I've done it largely from home with ropey Wi-Fi. I've watched way more Netflix, other streaming services, blah, 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 than I should do. So if anything, I've been over busy. So it's been very different in that I felt quite isolated because I live on my own. Ben.
Okay, quick things. What have I been doing in lockdown? Improbable during lockdown has been running a thing called Devoted and Disgruntled. So Devoted and Disgruntled is a program that existed before lockdown. It's a kind of alternative conference, I guess, a conversation for people who are audience members or work in theatre and performing arts about anything, the industry. That has moved online during lockdown. I'm speaking so quickly to try to answer this question before we run out of time, but my point in mentioning it is thanks. My point in mentioning it is basically, if you are involved in theatre and performing arts, or you're an audience member, or you're just curious, Devoted and Disgruntled is a free program of conversations about it that is for you. And if you go to devotedanddisgruntled.com, you can get involved. Another quick thing, Suzanne and I have been doing something together during lockdown, which is working on a thing called Art Cry, which is a brand new fund that is creating political and social work that responds to questions that are up in society at the moment. Again, if that speaks to you in any way, it's there for you to apply to. And we mean that in a really sort of genuine way. I guess a lot of the projects we've done so far are really locally focused things that have had massive impact. Google Art Cry and you'll find out more.
Thank you both for that. I see Lucy is back with us. Welcome back, Lucy.
Oh yeah, I mean, I know we're at 5 o'clock, but come on, Kat, what have you been up to
Oh,
during
what have
lockdown?
I been up to? I spent a lot of time in the park with my toddler, throwing sticks about, particularly in the first bit. But I've also so I've been delivering lots of work online. So I've been doing online workshops for young people. The Guyama Work project for disabled adults from the Bangladeshi community. That was set up online from the very start with this amazing kind of remote access that allows it to be completely accessible. So all the participants have to do is turn on a laptop, and then the Zoom room kind of appears for them. So yeah, it's been a big adjustment to go from, you know, always being in a room with people to suddenly creating stuff online. But yeah, I think I'm still figuring out what this new connection is. It's not the same as in the room, but it certainly is a thing. This thing that happens between people creating together online. So yeah, that's me.
Well, I am just so sorry that it is 5 o'clock. I mean, that hour just flew by. That was just so, man, it was just full of such rich things. And each of you would start talking about something. And I felt like I wanted you to keep going and keep going. But yeah, I mean, I just think that kind of overarching I think that notion of like whose stories are being told, and I think, yeah, I can't remember, you put it incredibly poetically, Suzanne, that how art can, yes, be a comfort, but it can be a documentation and a witness. And actually, if certain stories are left out of that witness, what is it for? It loses its power. And I think, you know, it's just, well, for one, it's just so encouraging to hear from the three of you, the three remarkable individuals doing incredible work. It's encouraging because there is a lot of fear about the future, you know, how there's a lot of optimism about it, of course, but there is an anxiety about the future. And you are absolutely right about this pandemic holding up a real bright light on the inequalities that already existed in our society in loads of different ways, including in the arts. So yeah, it's so encouraging to know that there are people like you who are heads of organisations, you're affiliated with other organisations, you're cross-working. That sounds so exciting, the Art Cry Fund, Ben and Suzanne, that you've got going on. Yeah, it's brilliant, and thank you so much. I think, yeah, you've brought a bit of optimism actually into this space for those things, and I just thank you for not being afraid of, yeah, looking at some really full-on philosophical kind of critical thinking about why we're here, what we're doing, what we want, what we need, what collectively and individually. So thank you. Now, in fact, it came in the questions box, but anyway, I'm sure if you want to carry on the conversation with Ben, Kat, Suzanne, one of them, all of them, I know they said at the beginning they'd love to hear from you. So I'm just trying to think of the best way to get in touch. I think if you're into social media and that's your thing, we can definitely, we'll connect up Ben, Kat and Suzanne, and also the organisations they work for. So it's Margaret's House for Kat, and Ben at Improbable. So we can connect on social media. If social media is not your thing, don't worry. I have to say, like, I struggle with it. Our brilliant Make Your Mark Charlotte, who's behind the scenes, looks after our social media for us, does an amazing job there. But do just get in touch with us. So you're obviously on the Make Your Mark website. So if you just go into the click contacts, and it will give the email address, so drop us a line anytime. We'd love to hear from you, and we'll find, you know, we do answer emails, so we'll find a way to connect people up. But Ben, Kat and Suzanne, have you got any like quick easy ones that people can put into their phones now in terms of staying in touch with you if they want to carry on chatting?
Yeah, mine's super easy. So I don't know if you can see my name on screen. So my Twitter and my Instagram is Suzanne_Alleyne, or just Google the project I'm doing, Neurology of Power, and that generally leads you back to me. Ben?
I'm not on social media, but if you go to improbable.co.uk, there's an email address on there and you can contact me on that, or at improbable1 if you are on Twitter.
I'm at Kat Gill, same as my name, _1, and also St Margaret's House. If you put that into Twitter, London will pop up as well.
That's great, and we'll shout about it. For if you missed that, I didn't quite get it down, we'll be shouting about that on our Twitter and on our Instagram as well. But yeah, do just get in touch with us anytime. And so I guess all that's left to say is, first, I do just want to thank our funders. So the amazing Arts Council England and NHS Charities together contributed to be able to make this whole programme of Make for Tomorrow possible, and we are so grateful to them. I mean, I'm grateful personally because it's been a real lifeline being able to connect with those of you who are tuning in, and all these incredible people who've come and shared where they're at, what they do. Yeah, it's a real joy. So we're really grateful to them, and also the amazing charity at Sussex Partnership Trust Heads On, because they the unsung heroes, because they're behind the scenes, like finding opportunities and funders who'll pitch in and make things like this happen. So we're really grateful to all of them. And also, I know we name checked at the beginning, but Liam and Sean at Arts Over Borders, thank you for bringing these three amazing people. So Ben, Kat, Suzanne, thank you so much for being here. Honestly, it's been such an enriching afternoon, and yeah, may these conversations continue outside of here. But yeah, all right, thanks everyone. Bye. And
thank you.
Keep in touch with us, because we've got another couple of events coming up, so we would love you to join us. So we'll let you know as soon as they're coming. We'll let you know. All right, that's it for now then, everyone. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time. All right, bye.
Bye.
Bye.